Good afternoon, members of the press. Thank you very much for attending today's press briefing. The subject of today's press briefing is to set out an alternative roadmap on behalf of the MDC Alliance to end Zimbabwe's international isolation. We apologize for the late start. I think you can all see the ZANU-PF thugs that are gathered outside. We're just waiting for the situation to die down before we started. But nonetheless, we continue. Before we get into the main subject of our presser, a few remarks. At the start of this year, President Nelson Chamisa articulated our agenda for 2021, which remains anchored on 5 pillars. These 5 pillars include a people's agenda, a reform agenda, a government agenda, a global advocacy agenda, and a broad alliance agenda. It's in this context, particularly of the people's agenda, that we've seen the President embark on a citizen conversation tour, which is going to be conducted throughout all the provinces of Zimbabwe. So far, he's covered Masvingo province and Manicaland province. I think we all saw from the coverage of that tour, that Meet the People tour, that he's been resoundingly welcomed in every village, in every town, in every city that he's visited. The key message that we get from the citizens that we continue to engage is that Zimbabwe's crisis continues to deepen. The crisis is permeated by poverty, it's permeated by injustice, and is permeated by chronic corruption. We continue to see the political implosion which calls for deep systemic political reform. As the MDC Alliance, we continue to call for electoral reforms, political reforms, and economic reforms as set out in our reload document so that Zimbabwe can return to legitimacy and democracy. We continue our call for all citizens to converge around the idea of transformation so that as we gear towards 2023, we form a broad alliance that can win Zimbabwe for change. Without further ado, I'm going to defer proceedings to the Vice President of the MDC Alliance, Professor Welshman Ncube, who's also overly in charge of matters of international diplomacy and relations, who's going to cover the subject of today's presser, which is Zimbabwe's return, or the roadmap for a return for Zimbabwe from its period of international isolation. I think it's been quite topical over the last weeks. After he's done, I'm going to field just a few questions, so please make sure you stay behind for that. Thank you. Without further ado, Prof. Ncube.
Thank you very much, Padre, for the opening remarks in respect of this press conference. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, members of the fourth estate. Let me, before I go to the subject matter of this press conference, acknowledge the presence of the rest of the leadership of the MDC who join us today for this press conference. Of course, you know the Vice President, Honorable and IDT on immediate right. On my immediate left, there is Gladys Sachoyo, who is the Secretary for International Affairs in the party, under which portfolio substance this presser falls. On her left is, of course, Honorable James Timber, who is the Secretary for Presidential Affairs in the President's office. On his left is last Mandama, the newly appointed Secretary for Research and Policy in the Standing Committee of the party. Hiding behind me is the young man whom you know very well, Ostalos Gift Zimbabwe, with deputizes Fatai, who has already spoken to you, so I will not introduce any further. When it comes to present time, Fatai will lead in fielding those questions, and any of the team members who are here will be welcome to assist in answering any question. We all are aware that Zimbabwe has laced from crisis to crisis for a very, very long time. A crisis which is essentially a political crisis, a crisis of legitimacy, in that over several decades now we have had disputed election after disputed election, and these disputed elections arise because of the huge deficit in governance, which is manifested most sharply during election time. The issues relating to the rule of law, the capture of the court, which reached unprecedented levels which we never experienced during Mugabe's rule. The violence that is taking place continuously, epitomized by what you see outside, the constant, continuous intimidation and violation of our basic rights. To have people gather outside here today in order to seek to intimidate us from exercising our political rights just establishes what is wrong with Zimbabwe. Fatai has already referred to what has been happening during the president's rural outreach program, what happened in Mafingo, what happened in Manicaland, the use of firearms, literally assassination attempt, the assaults on some of our activists on the ground. You've seen the pictures, you've heard the audios, they have been hospitalized, and that sort of thing. And it is clear that those that govern us today have no respect whatsoever of the constitution of the country, have no respect for the rule of law, they have no respect for our fundamental freedoms enshrined in the constitution. They constantly are harassing the people of this country. They are depriving us of our elementary freedoms, literally the oxygen that we need politically to breathe. And it is in this context that we therefore welcome the statement that emanated in the last 48 hours from SADC on sanctions. What is important about that statement, those of you who have had a look at it, are paragraphs 5 and 6 in that statement. For the first time in a long time, SADC is clearly recognizing that the crisis in Zimbabwe is multifaceted, is recognizing that the international isolation of Zimbabwe is as a result of the bilateral and multilateral disputes that Zimbabwe has with the international community in terms of Zimbabwe fulfilling its international obligations under various international treaties on human rights, on governance, etc., etc. If you read carefully that statement, you will see the acknowledgement by SADC that Zimbabwe needs international support with the reform agenda. Of course, the statement is bare-bone. We need to talk about what is that reform agenda. When Zimbabwe engages the international community on a reform agenda, we must have engaged with ourselves first it is imperative that you can't be going to talk to the Americans, to the British, to the EU, when you have not talked to yourself. That reform agenda needs to be national, needs to be locally grounded, needs to be agreed to by the stakeholders in Zimbabwe, which basically means the political parties, civil society, ZANU-PF as the ruling party. We need to have a conversation about that reform agenda. It cannot be a reform agenda unilaterally adopted or fronted by ZANU-PF. But however, we welcome this recognition that there is need for reform in Zimbabwe. There is need for Zimbabwe to engage with the international community on that reform agenda. We on our part say we must engage with ourselves as Zimbabwe on that reform agenda, so that when we engage with the international community, we are of the same mind as to what needs to be done. Let's never forget that the international isolation of Zimbabwe began a long time ago and was in fact a result of our own actions. You will remember there were times when we expelled from Zimbabwe international observers. We did not allow them to observe our elections. We did all sorts of things that we should not have done. And that was the genesis of the international community beginning to take restrictive measures, to make sanctions, generally to make sanctions against individuals on Zimbabwe because of our own conduct. And we need to go back to that. What did we do and what should we not have done? There's also paragraph 6 of the SADC statement. And that paragraph 6 is critically important because, again, for the first time, all along SADC has supported Zimbabwe on the lifting of sanctions, has called for the lifting of sanctions. Even when we're in government, we were all in the re-engagement committee to discuss with the international community on the issue of the international isolation of Zimbabwe. But there's always been a reluctance of acknowledging the core deficit which resulted in the international community acting in the manner that it acted in isolating us. The issues around the rule of law, the deficit on democracy, the deficit on good governance, the violations of human rights, they are all captured for the first time in that SADC statement. And we welcome that. And we assume that SADC would not have issued a statement such as this without consulting all the member states of SADC, including Zimbabwe. In that assumption, therefore, we further assume that the Zimbabwean government has accepted all the paragraphs which are contained in this statement and has accepted the link between the international isolation of the country and the things which are covered in paragraphs 5 and 6 of the community. And this, in my view, in the view of the MDC Alliance, opens opportunities for the country, for us to accept and to welcome this position, to talk to ourselves, to have dialogue among ourselves, and hopefully to agree on the things that we need to do. The 2023 elections are not far away, it's less than 2 years away. We are already in campaign season. The behavior of trying to close democratic space right now is of course informed by the fact that the elections are around the corner, and you see the old bad habits of trying to deprive the people of Zimbabwe their most fundamental right. The most fundamental right of the people of Zimbabwe is their sovereignty. And our sovereignty as a people is captured in our right to determine who must lead us, what kind of government must run the country. That's the most fundamental of all the freedoms. Our right to choose our government unhindered, unmolested, unharassed, be free of violence. And we say therefore, as we approach 2023, it is important to respect that fundamental right of the people of Zimbabwe to constitute a government of their choice. Without the things that we see, without the things that we are seeing right outside these premises today, without all the things that we have seen being done to our president as he has traveled around the country. And you can't have a legitimate election unless and until you pull back from these things. Let me end by saying this. The most important reforms do not cost money. They cost absolutely nothing. They don't even cost time. They actually save money. and those reforms are leave the people alone. Allow people to freely assemble. Allow people to express themselves. Allow free political activity. It doesn't cost anybody anything to do those things. And of course there are things which cost money, which must be done. Do proper voter registration, have voter registration outreach programs, make sure every Zimbabwean who has turned over 18 years has the necessary and requisite document to register as a voter, that you have registration centers closest to the people who need them, that you have as little hindrance as possible to registration. Any government which is founded on the will of the people must consider its duty to make sure that each and every citizen is registered to vote, so that each and every citizen can participate in the process of constitution of a government of the country. So those things must be done in respect of voter registration. Those things must be done in ensuring that the voter's roll is accurate. All the things that are necessary for our democracy to thrive. Ladies and gentlemen, those are my remarks at this pressure. I now hand back to Professor. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vice President Ncube. I'm going to ask you to just stand there. We're going to field a few questions, primarily on the subject of today's presser. So please, as usual, put your hand up, identify yourself, give us your name and the news house that you're coming from, and we'll take your question. Please feel free to use vernacular if that's what your news house uses, or if that's what you're comfortable with. We're open to an inclusive question and answer section. Yes, sir. And please, can I ask that you speak up so that everybody can hear?
Thank you. My name is Takuchi Mbakwe from Zimbabwe TV. The Vice President highlighted that one of the key statements or areas that SADC touched on was the issue of internal dialogue. On the other side, ZANU-PF is saying we've got Pollard. What's your position now? Isn't it better to have been part of Pollard and try to make it work within? Isn't that a form of internal dialogue? Thank you.
Thank you, Taku. Vipi?
In a democracy, one of the fundamental things is consultation. Pollard was born unilaterally, was constituted by President Mnangagwa alone without consulting anybody. The second principle is that if you are to have a seat somewhere where there is dialogue concerning the rights of people, you must represent a constituency. I can't claim to want a seat at a dialogue table to represent myself and my wife. It's not sensible. It's not sensible. You must have a constituency. The people who have a constituency politically in this country are those political parties who were supported by Zimbabweans at the last election, either in the presidential election by the votes that you got, or in the parliamentary elections or the local government election. And if you therefore say, let's talk about who should be at the table, let's talk about it and let's agree who should be there. But do not dictate to us who should be there. for one, the MDC Alliance cannot agree to be at a table with individuals who have no political party, just ran as presidential candidates, who were getting 0 votes in the majority of polling stations, who their combined total are less than 0.001% of votes. They have no organization, they are accountable to no one. So we're saying, let us talk about that. We do not believe you should be at any dialogue table because you simply contested the presidential election. If at the very least it had been said, Pollard is based on the political parties with representation in parliament, we will say, fine, at least there is a constituency that you represent. But we do not support unilateralism. We do not support that anyone, even if you hold the office of president. After all, that office of president is not your office. It is an office that you are put in by the people of Zimbabwe. It is a representative office. And you therefore need to have dialogue with the people in order to establish a viable framework for dialogue. We don't believe that Pollard is a viable framework for dialogue. With the greatest respect. With the greatest respect. I thank you.
Thank you. Next question. Are there no questions? People aren't going to be blowing up my inbox after this to say, what's your position on? Please feel free as well to use vernacular if that's what you're comfortable with. If there are no questions, all that remains is for me to thank you all very much. As the MDC Alliance, we continue our call to all citizens. Let's come together. None but ourselves are going to rescue Zimbabwe from the crisis that we find ourselves in. So let's all be part of the broad alliance that's going to win Zimbabwe for change. We are absolutely confident in the able leadership of the People's President, Advocate Nelson Chamisa, who's going to lead the charge and create a convening platform for all Zimbabweans to come together. Thank you very much and have a good day.
Thank you.